Welcome to the Artist Index. I'm Scott Bishop, your host for this episode. I'm a New Bedford-based singer, songwriter, and sound sculptor making music under the name Scapegoat. I also present the live concert series, Unexpected Music, which features South Coast musicians performing in non-traditional performing spaces around New Bedford. The In Focus podcasts are generously sponsored in part by Heavenly Spirits Importers and funded in part with grants from the New Bedford Cultural Council and the Fairhaven Cultural Council, local agency supported by the Mass Cultural Council, a state agency. I'd like to invite our guest to introduce herself, spell her name, and talk a little bit about what she does.
Hi there. My name is Knutsen. It's Kat, short for Katherine, K-A-T, and then Knutsen is K-N-U-T-S-E-N. And I'm an artist. I live in New Bedford, Massachusetts. I also love art community, and I love stirring the pot a little bit when it comes to trying to help encourage more art-related events to occur, and also partake in art events, whether they're exhibits or music performances or going to friend performances or animations. I teach at the junior college, Bristol Community College in New Bedford and in Fall River. And my background stems from painting, from figurative painting, but I love animation and music. My favorite thing is where music and visual arts come together, which is in the video arts. But beyond that, I love art community. I love what can come from collaborations with other art creatives, whether they're music-based, visual-based. So good to meet everyone again.
Yeah, and good to talk about the many hats you wear, particularly the music one, because I've known that you're a musician for quite a while, but kind of my awareness of your work grew when you started talking about your new project with Mike Heffernan, which actually isn't that new because it debuted back in April. Could you tell us about Long Swan?
Yeah, so Long Swan is a small music group that Mike Katherine and I started to form in 2021, around October. Actually, we just hit a year. And it started off with us just kind of jamming together. Mike has a background in like folk music, and also he plays music at the St. Anthony's Church downtown in New Bedford. And I have a little bit more of a type, kind of like a ethereal. Some people say I should write music for video games as well. So there's like a bit of ethereal and bit of a play with my music. I play keys in that group. He plays guitar, and we just love writing songs that tell stories about anything from the end of the world coming, but then there's still hope, to an everyday like frustration that may come from like a breakup with a girlfriend. He just recently wrote a fun song about that, and I said, make sure you include her perspective on that. Or we'll write fun songs about maybe this idea of a larger awareness. There's one I recently wrote called Silver Lines. That's about, though things could be crappy, there's always a silver line, and it could be twisted into something that turns more into potential, like a learning opportunity that then turns into growth, that then turns into a creative adventure. We've performed at Gallery X, and we got to perform for the series that you designed, Scott, actually, when we worked on
Unexpected Music. Yeah.
Unexpected Music at the Drawing Room. And we've got to perform at Hatch Street. And it's just been a really great experience. Also, my husband, Mike Gallant, he plays in that group, the trombone, and he's maybe experimenting with some drums. I just ordered him some drumsticks. We'll see how that goes. And, Andrew Hopkinson also plays in that group. He's the bass player. And we're going out to see a fellow musician friend, Eric Leone, in Lincoln, Rhode Island tomorrow, and then to kind of scope out that scene a little bit. But it's fun. I would love to, in the Long Swan project, record a couple of pieces and then explore the animation side to that. So I'm very eager to get to animating for that group.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the animation, because it's very playful, exciting. How did you develop your style? Because it is a very distinctive style.
Yeah, so my background in painting heavily influenced my beginnings in animation. When I was at UMass, I went there for painting for my MFA, and I started to experiment with stop motion animation with painting. And I really loved how just, the paintbrush strokes move over time. And then when I worked on Loving Vincent, I got to spend a lot of time working with painting and animation. And then lately, I've been super curious about, these things called sequences, the PNG sequences. And I teach electronic imaging at BCC, and what I kind of use the students as a little bit of like an experimenting lab. Like, does this make sense to y'all? If y'all try this, what do you think of this? Put your spin on this. And what I do now is I like play with creating like these environment pieces, and then creating these really basic sequences of images that I loop through those environments. And then there's a really cool program called Adobe After Effects that I love working with. It's very simple. It works with something called keyframing, where you change properties like scale, opacity, position, anchor point. You can also put some really amazing effects onto your work. So you drag and drop these sequences onto your timeline and you start to manipulate them. And then it becomes a game of figure ground, like where you have content going on in the foreground, midground, and the background. There's a lot of negative, positive space play on things, and it turns into a dance. So if you have like let's say a character that's not moving, like an illustrated character, and let's say you create a sequence of like a still object that's moving in space around that character. Are they overlapping in front of it, behind it? Are they close to us because it's bigger? Is it further away? Is it smaller? So I love playing with those like spatial dynamics, the same dynamics I would play with in painting, but more so with motion. I really love deconstructing other animations to see what they do. It's kind of like being a scientist in a lab and looking at, other specimens of animation and seeing, oh, they made a sequence that was moving at this rate, and then they have this other sequence in front of that, and they have this background, simplified sequence. And then, so I love studying, it's like dance, like looking at how, like, if you have like four sequences of moving objects, how they're moving in conjunction with each other. It's also like weaving different ideas together. Um, I love looking at shows like there's Rick and Morty, there's the old Futurama. I kind of grew up on Futurama a little bit. There's Disenchantment, and I love how the artists in those shows, like, they put their drawing and their painting and illustration skills to work, and then how the animators like are very clever at putting like not so much effort forward, but um, drawing very efficiently to create these sequences that create the illusion of like physics. Like if someone's getting ready to throw something, there's like four drawings you can create with the arm that create the illusion of throwing. And so it's like, bits of anatomy, bits of perspective drawing, shape, scale, design elements. So it feels like being like a cook in the kitchen with animation. And then when you have music in the background, oh my gosh, it makes it come to life even more so. So it's an activity that's much more fun to do with friends, because if you're making what I call the assets, like the visuals, that's a whole thing in itself. If you're animating, that's a whole thing in itself. If you're editing, that's a thing in itself. If you're making like the Foley sound, which is the sound effects for the visuals, that really brings it to life, that like breathes life into it. That's a whole thing, like finding the Foley sound or making the Foley sound. And then there's the ambient sound, which is that psychological headspace, that goes into like, if you see somebody doing a basic walk cycle and you put like this haunting music behind them, it's like something's getting ready to happen. But if you put this very like happy-go-lucky sound behind them, like it has a totally different type of environment that molds from that. So it's putting all these components together that's really fun. But it is very involved of a process. Like it takes a lot more to make like a single moment of animation than it does to like make like a drawing, a sketch, because there's all these different aspects or ingredients involved.
I'm wondering, when you work with music and video, are you like taking a piece of music and animating to it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Absolutely. I like what the music inspires, and then I'll start animating and then play the animation with the music, and then they'll go back and forth to each other. But it's always inspired by the music firsthand.
And what's the overlap between animation and music? Because you mentioned, for instance, these image loops, and of course, songs have a very specific structure. They have a chord sequence in each section of the song. What do you see as the common ground in those things, not only structurally but in terms of your creative life?
So let's say if I'm making like I love chord combinations. I love like the shapes that they create. Like we were in practice on Tuesday, and the guys were talking. We had just finished practicing the set, and I was messing around with a couple of like chord combos, and it was like B C B. It was like a whole note for each one of those, and then it went like B and then E flat, E, C, and B. And those, no, B, E flat, E minor, and then C and B. So there's a really fascinating emotional landscape, I think, that comes from different chord progressions. And the loops that the chord progressions make are really fascinating. And I've always seen, since I was a kid, this is something I remember when I saw Fantasia, I was just blown away with the visuals that Disney put together with these really well-known classical pieces. And I like when I hear music that doesn't necessarily have the lyrics presented at first. There's just a plethora of potential visual stories that come from that, but they're not very specifically narrated. They're more like essences, like feelings, emotive landscapes in a way. So with music, like let's say that fun chord progression like B C B and then B E flat E minor C and B, like depending on how that's played, like that could be a really interesting alluring sound depending on the rhythm that that's played with or the different instruments, like if there's any harmony that's interwoven into there, that then starts to create a potential for a visual idea. So the visual idea could be a location that's created, like some sort of a space that then needs to be drawn out. Is it an interior space? Is it exterior? Is it a small up close scale of something farther away? And then I'll listen to it again. And then I'll start to think of some sort of a character of some sort or an entity. And it could be what's so fun about this is there's a lot of personification that goes on, like applying like a humanness to things. Like I have like my coffee cup in my hand right now. And do you remember Disney's Beauty and the Beast? And there was like Chip,
Yes.
little cup, you know? I love how Disney personifies everyday items. So like there's the landscape that comes from like listening to those chord progressions together. And then there's this element of a mood that's created. And the mood could then be further either personified or contrasted with. And you could take any item and start to animate it, but animate it in a way that's got a human-esque nature to it. And all of a sudden, the audience develops a potential empathy for that item
Yeah.
or that animal. And I think that is so fascinating because it keeps it open as far as experience goes and somewhat interpretive open. But it also kind of creates a bit of a target-esque direction for a project to start like moving towards. Like if you have clay spinning on the wheel, it's like I'm going to make a thing out of this. I don't know, but we're going in the same direction. This is going in the same, but you're still not sure what it's going to turn into. So like that process of the chords, like starting to create an essence of a feeling, a vibe, a mood, and then that visual brain kicks in, and it's like, oh, this reminds me of this type of a story. Like one of the last practices we had, there was one of the songs we were playing with, and they gave me this idea that I really want to animate, where it's about squirrels trying to find the nuts, and there's an impending nuclear winter that's coming, and so all the squirrels are like trying to get all the nuts, and they see the other squirrels trying to get the nuts, and they go after they fight each other over these stupid nuts for a bit, and then but the way the song like kind of evolves, it kind of turns into this feeling where it's like they end up realizing if they work together, they're all going to have more nuts and they survive the winter, as opposed to fighting at each other. So that feels like fun and silly. Like with the squirrels are just trying to grab a nut and bury it. A lot of times they forget where they put the nuts anyway. But it's also kind of has this like metaphorical play on like a bit of a life that even humans relate to, like we're like scarcity mindset versus teamwork mindset. And that's where I think what I love a lot about how the music and the visual arts kind of like merge together. Like some of us are more like we're sensitive to seeing something visually. Some of us are more sensitive musically, but there's these really amazing amalgamations that come from playing around with those chord structures, seeing what visually is like inspired by what's heard from that, and then a narration that kind of feels influenced from that, and then that built into like with the animation world a little bit, and then the frustrations that come with the animation world. Like it's beautiful. It kind of makes me it allows my brain to sincerely like change directions, and it's okay to change directions. I've always struggled with staying in one direction for an extended amount of time. There's always a need to either like create bits of like either little dualities within an approach I take, or be very tangential. So I love how music and animation kind of allows for this faceted approach, and they feed on each other, and they create this like almost like this Mobius strip of like we started over here in band practice, and then we ended up with squirrels trying to collect enough nuts for a nuclear winter. That just being an example. The animation allows the brain to kind of move in a lot of these different directions, and the music allows me to kind of like just respond more intuitively or hear what's going on around me, and respond to that. And it's just this, it's kind of like, that original video game of like the two the ping pong that was
Yeah,
going.
Pong. I
It's like
remember it
that.
well.
It's basically like that. One side you got visual, one side you got audio, and they're going back and forth with each other.
And you got to follow the ball and have one side be sure to connect
Yes.
and
Yes.
move in the direction that it's implying.
Yes, absolutely.
What I also get is there's this really interesting juxtaposition, particularly in the animation you describe, where, and this is true with music and video as well, because you talked earlier about a guy walking down a street. If you put ominous music, you think something bad is going to happen. If you put happy music, he's like, oh, he's having a great day. He just hit the lottery or something. But then also within the framework of this animation, you have the juxtaposition of this comedy of squirrels fighting each other over nuts as nuclear winter descends on them. And it's just really fascinating because it sounds like a real high contrast. You've got comedy up in front and total disaster in the back.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what's really fun. Like I think that's what makes really good creative stuff, really good art, is having those bits of contextual contrast, and also bits of play and humor, and bits of naughtiness, and bits of like all sorts of things we're like maybe not allowed to express or say more frankly up front without getting a weird side eye from
Yeah.
people. It's such an amazing terrain to like just throw a lot of stuff out there, but at the same time like organize it in a way, present it in a way that that the audience like can enjoy.
It makes sense in that context, whereas what you're describing is outside of that context. If say you're at a funeral and you crack a joke, it's like, well, why did you do that? And yet there's humor going on even around tragedy or death. And you can use art and music to actually acknowledge that where you couldn't actually do it in real life.
Yes, and that makes it extremely cathartic and therapeutic, because like there's these like life's very heavy sometimes, and it's there's all these beautiful things to life, but there's that heaviness to it, and it can make you feel stuck sometimes. And so this what I love about that creative process is it kind of creates a back door out of nowhere. It's magic. It's like, this sucks, but you know what? It makes me think of this, which makes me think of this. Oh, that's kind of funny, or that's kind of interesting. And it kind of creates this opportunity to like see something differently, turn things upside down, have a bit of a twist. MC Escher was always one of my favorite artists because he was so good at bending space. But then you think like psychologically, metaphorically, you bend situations. Like, I don't know if that makes me come across as like an overly optimist. Like I feel more like a realist, but I still always feel like, oh, we could do this. This is going on, but it could go this way. We could try that. And like I love that about the creative process. It just like it can mix a lot of these different things together, whether it's dark tragedy, or if it's something that's very like, it could be the opposite. If there's something that's super like high, like exciting, it's like, well, I mean, have we thought about this? This could also be a thing, that not an impending doom, but a realist thing, like the election that recently just passed, the
Yeah.
midterms. I've been listening and watching that stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is so fascinating. Or the stuff that's going on with Twitter, or like Elon Musk, and I'm
Yeah.
like, is he intentionally destroying that thing? How could he? He can't be like bombing that so bad, like unintentionally, but that would be something to create, an example to create content, to kind of like make fun of it, or like, and that's what's so beautiful about these processes. And with animation, like I'll use Elon as like an example, like not too fond of the dude, but like it'd be interesting to see. When I first heard about what was going on, I imagined him holding up the Twitter logo and it disintegrating. And he's like, oh no, now I'm like, I think he wanted that thing to disintegrate. So if I like changed his expressions ever so slightly with an animation, and then changed the music, like it started off with this like uh-oh whoop, and then it shifted over to this music like that felt a little bit more like sinister. It's like, that's something that the animation music together can like articulate in a lot of funny different ways. And the visuals for the animation, man, that can go in so many different directions, like the way it's drawn, the colors that are used, the textures, the material, so it's this like not you cannot possibly be satiated if you're animating, because there's so many things. There's like, if you have a bottomless pit of wanting to try new stuff, like there's so many ways to take like rendering visuals for stuff. There's so many ways to take, approaching how you're going to manipulate or edit the audio or throwing these things together. And the balance, the nuance of the balance, can create some very different outcomes.
What I'm also getting out of that, and I think this is true in music too, is you talked about, finding a direction or the direction being suggested. Because when the whole field is open, you can get paralyzed, or you can just get bogged down with trying everything. And in this process, are you looking for that direction, saying, now I can kind of go in this path, because if I check all the paths, I'm going to be here till doomsday working on this stuff.
Right. Yeah, I have to create small goals, like absolute little goals. So I've lately I've been driving the band a little nuts, saying, okay, we're going to record a piece, and they're like, it's not ready yet, and I'm like, let's record something, and let's have the basic structure of the song recorded so I can get to work on animating it. And like going back to the idea of like the squirrel and the doomsday thing, there has to be like a specific concrete idea that is kind of held over the whole project, like this is the direction we're going in, and you kind of have to stick to that. And then deadlines are beautiful. I love deadlines because it means results have to happen by a certain time, and whatever you have is what you have. And so that, having the idea in mind, the topic in mind, plus the deadlines, it creates like a sense of a control of like making sure a product's created, but it also keeps it open, because you're not saying on this deadline this has to be rendered in this way. It's like, no, we have to have this amount of content by this day, and this amount of content by this day, and this rendering has to be done by this day. And so I love deadlines. They create more stress, I'm not gonna lie. It does put a bit of like not workaholism, but like a bit of pressure, because if you don't meet the deadlines, then your project just starts to float away. So there's just having a specific idea that to try to stick to, being flexible around it, but still like, I'm not gonna change this to like Princess and Frog type narrative. It's like, no, we're not in that world. We're in this world of like individualism versus teamwork versus the world end. We're gonna stay in that, stick to the squirrel narrative, for that case. But we could maybe invite other characters into it, but just keeping it simple, just trying to keep the dynamic between the story idea simple, and then allowing other complexities to come in. Like there's a lot of different musical expressions that could add to the nuance of that narrative. Like if you have like two neighbor squirrels, and one of them, they're just both competing with the best way to store the nuts, and they forget about the fact that they're storing nuts. It's more about this like perfection of a way to store them, and then it's like
Not even thinking about, you're going to need those down the road.
Yeah. It's like, and it's also fun. Like, again, I was mentioning this earlier. There's like the personification that kind of goes into the story, so it adds enough variety. So even though there's like a tight narrative idea that you want to keep in mind, like squirrels, nuts, sharing, individualism, nuclear winter, there's a lot of other variational directions that your story can take. And that's just like that one example. Like there's all sorts of like life experiences that could be expanded on and then translated metaphorically into something. It could be anything. Like And that's what I love about like the visual arts, like visually creating a metaphor that symbolically like mirrors something or talks about something, and then the music side, which I think adds so much life and breath to it. And the middle ground that comes from the two of those together, I haven't found a medium that tops that yet. Because there's a sensation of seeing something visually, and it's like, oh, that's beautiful. There's a sensation of like feeling something from the music, you know, what you play or what others play, that's beautiful. But you put them together, whoa, it's a really, really amazing experience. It's a lot more difficult to produce that because you're working in these multiple directions of visual and audio and editing and planning and teamwork, communicating with others. But it's really, I love it. I really love that about the animation approach.
Do you ever find yourself going back to the music and saying, or bandmates saying maybe we should adjust some things based on the visuals?
Um, Not yet, not yet. Haven't gotten that far. Um, and if the bandmates said that, we'd have to record that again. So right now we're still making our first set of songs, our first EP, and we're still like looking for a drummer, for example. It's all guitar, bass, keys, and trombone. And we're maybe like, as we're figuring out just the percussiveness of it, and we have a couple of drummers that might be coming on board with the next practices. We still have to just record something. So I think what will happen is after we record and the animations are created, it'd be interesting if they want to go back and re-record a song for that. I will be like, it took us this long to record one of the EPs to animate. I'll be like throwing those angry, hairy eyeballs. Like, it took us this much to get this far. Why don't we just make another song
Well,
and start the process over again?
but the good thing with the current tools, working in your audio station and on your laptop, is that
Oh, yes.
is that you can actually say, well, we can do another approach on top of this. We have the
Yes.
basic tracks, so if it's not like a total rearrangement, but there's things that we want to highlight, or maybe parts of instrumentation we want to redo, you can still do it. You can get
Yes.
into a real obsessive state with that. When I think about that stuff, I think about how Peter Gabriel made records in the 80s where he had multiple master tapes for each song because he wanted all the options. So, a good example is Red Rain. You have two drummers on that. You have Rick Marotta playing the main drum track, but then he decided, well, I want Stuart Copeland's hi-hat on that. And he literally had a situation where the engineer had to cut a strip. He had to cut the track from one tape and then splice it into the other tape. With modern tools, you don't have to worry about that, but that's how obsessive you could get with it. Like, oh, what if we do this? It's when you have all the unlimited options, it just gets paralyzing. It's one of the wildest stories I've ever heard. It just made me think of that.
That's brilliant. That is amazing. I wonder how his brain was going when he decided to add the hi-hat in there. You say the top hat or the hi-hat?
It was the hi-hat.
The
Yeah.
hi-hat. When he was thinking about adding that, I wonder where in that process of recording and mastering he was when he made that decision. Because that's wonderful. The Now that you present it that way, I think it would be neat. Like if we had a recording of one of the songs, and if the visuals had already started, like the animation component had already started, like the programs that I'm working with, like it's all in the Adobe suite. It wouldn't be that difficult to re-record, certain tracks or to add other tracks to it. Like that wouldn't be, if there was an inspiring sensation that one of the musicians like said, no, we need to add this track to it, or if we were going to retake, let's say Mike's doing this really cool like thing on the trombones, like can we do that, but then let's switch it out with the bass instead of the alto trombone or the tenor, and then let's mellow it out a lot more as opposed to more of an attack like that seems like potentially doable. But um, that would be an interesting process, because then you've got like the music side like reshifting, to fit what's going on with the visual side. With the visuals, it's very easy to add and take away as well. Like you've got your key components, like your set, basically your environment. You've got your, I call them inanimates, which are the still objects, and then you've got your sequences, which are the moving components, and those are all separate ingredients that are being thrown together in the video editing software. So you could adjust those. Now the audio, Like Premiere is an okay. It's not Ableton or it's not Pro Tools, but it's okay when it comes to editing some of the audio tracks and bringing, a couple of basic effects into that. But yeah, it could be flexible, shifting and modulating the sound properties more.
Wild. I want to get into the songwriting process because you talked about jamming. Is it a collective effort writing the songs? And how
Yes.
does that work?
So I I love chord progressions and I love um, contrast between minor and major sounds a lot. Like I feel like they flip the nuance of how something feels. Like the song Silver Lines I was just talking about, it starts off in C diminished and then it goes into C sharp minor, then G sharp minor, and then D sharp minor. And then it shifts over to see C sharp major. So it moves around based on the nuance of what the previous chord did, and it modulates a little bit. And there's this thing in drawing and painting called simultaneous contrast, where one tone or one color looks very different based on its neighbors. Like a
Yes.
purple could look different because of what's around it. So I think about that with music, like the C sharp minor feels very bright when it follows a C diminished. But if you like start with C sharp minor and then go to like A, the C sharp minor sounds kind of dreary. So I love the chord progression play and what types of moods those create. Mike Heffernan, he's a lyricist. He just makes these beautiful, he's a poet. He makes these gorgeous lines, I think, of words. And I'm starting to get better at, creating lyrics because I'm more of this like landscape, explorer with the music. And a lot of times we'll put ideas together. Like there's this one song, Drive. I wrote all the chord progressions for that, but then he wrote the lyrics for that. And that song turned into this haunting, nostalgic feeling song about two people that, ended up not becoming like together. They were like friends, but then they parted and then life happens and then they meet each other again and they're like, how was your life? You hadn't seen each other in a while. And that was a really beautiful song. That's Drive that, you know, he heard the chord progressions that I was putting down and these like sequences of them, and then he put those lyrics on there. And so I really like creating that way where like multiple artists get a chance to like respond to what they feel is happening. And then Andrew, he's putting in these really nice like bass lines into the place. He's also a bit of since we don't have a drummer, we'll each kind of take turns adding bits to the songs that have more of a rhythmic influence. The Mike, he does some really neat like solo components. He has a bit of a Spanish guitar-esque feel to his music approach, and so I'll have like a rhythmic control on the chords, for a bit while he's like doing a solo on top of that. Or as I'm starting to learn more about like just improvising more so on the right hand, Mike will take control of the chords, or Andrew will take control of the chords. But like writing the songs, like I usually approach it with chords and like, how am I feeling in this moment? Or if I had a really interesting experience, I'll try to capture that in an illustrated mindset via chord progression, you know. But then that experience that's captured in the chord progressions won't necessarily become the song story lyrically, music like lyric wise. And so
But
it's
it
playing.
informs it in its way because you've set a scene musically.
Yes. And so, yeah, and then we will just like kind of hash it out and we'll play through it. It has like a, like verse, chorus, bridge, intro, out like bits of like solo moments, like little components right in the middle or the beginning, middle of the song for people to solo on top of. And we'll just run through it repeatedly, try something new. And like the song Silver Lines, where we're trying two different speeds like BPMs right now. Like it starts off pretty slow. It's a 6/8. I can't get out of waltz. I love waltz and ballads. I can 6/8 and 3/8 and 3/4 for days. I love those time signatures. So it starts off a little bit slower, and then it starts to move more towards this rocker. Like it stays in that 6/8 sensation, but it kind of feels very 4/4-ish. Goes back and forth between 6/8 4/4, and it builds up, and it also it feels a bit like a sea shanty at the very beginning, and then it turns more into like an epic ballady type feel near the end. So that each song kind of evolves in itself depending on what goes on during practice. Sometimes there'll be like this playful, component, and that will influence, how the song is approached. Other times, like we might play the same songs, but like one of us is tired, so the whole set list will be like slowed down, and we'll find something new. We're like, oh wait a minute, I like how that song sounds better with that part slow than when we played it faster. So it's this exchange, this dialogue, you know, it's neat because music, you can't see it, you hear it. And so even if you are like envisioning something, which the animation brain comes in right there, but you're kind of like, it doesn't feel like blind leading the blind, but it's like you're all the musicians are like putting their feelers out there. It's like, this makes me think of, and then they play something, and it's neat, weaving those different parts together.
There's also that moment of, I think musicians connecting, like you hit a certain spot and you're all on the same wavelength, which
Yes.
is just one of those unique experiences, because you might spend a half hour working on an idea and not get there. And suddenly you just change the progression, or somebody hits on a part. It's like, let's do that.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And then that's amazing. Like when the musicians really start to weave together, and then that telepathic component that comes where you can hear what one musician's kind of doing, you can feel the essence of how their riff is moving along, and then you weave in harmony, not literal harmony, but like you're kind of stacking. Like they may have these like not cavities or holes of what they're doing, and then you can go in there and like put something that is very complementary, or additive. And it's not, sometimes it's just minimal, minimal thing that you're doing, and it's beautiful. Yeah, finding those sweet spots is amazing. I get to play with Brian and the cassettes. I'm very lucky.
Yep.
And Brian and Bowie and Rob, they have a really amazing flow that they build in with each other. And it's fun when I'm playing with those guys. Like I'm on flute, so there's these heavy rock, sounds that are coming out, and there's a flute that plays, and it's a much quieter instrument, but it's fun, like trying to surf, and create these little light riffs, like da 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 da, that are in harmony, but also referencing the melody with them. But with Long Swan, like listening to what it's a lot of that back and forth percussive and lyrical exchange with Mike Heffernan, like guitar and keys. And then as Andy's starting to come in more and more, he's integrating these really neat lines that are like really harmonious with what Mike and I are doing. And then when my husband Mike Gallant comes in, either with the trombone, or now he's starting to experiment with the drums, it's just neat weaving these different parts together, and trying to let everyone, like, make sure that everyone's like, just expressing something that they think works with the moment, and then doing another take, and seeing like, okay, what do we like, what do we not like, what will we shift, and then in the meantime throwing out these ideas of like visuals that are kind of being inspired from what we're hearing. So it's a dance. It's like it's really neat. It's beautiful.
That leads me to my next question, because you were talking earlier about wanting to record a song and the rest of the band's like, it's not ready. How do you all know or agree that a song is ready?
Well, I guess when everybody's like, I like that. Everyone's like, I'm happy with that. And we've done a couple of rough takes, like with like the Tascam recorders.
Yeah.
Like you've got one recording from that. But I guess it's just when everyone feels like they can happily like kind of walk away from a recording, or if they're tired, if they're like, we've done this take like 50 times, I'm happy with that one. So it's when people feel like satisfied enough with it.
I want to ask a big picture question, which is, how do you balance everything you do? Because you have art, teaching, animation, and music,
And
along
you're
with community building. How do you create a structure to juggle all of those things, or do you have to juggle them?
So I'm always aggressively working on something, but sometimes it might not be time to work on something because it's been overworked, but I still have that energy to put into something. So I'll switch it up, and I'll go to a different project or a different subject that I'm working on. Like teaching is pretty balanced. It's rhythmic. We meet regularly. There's a curriculum that, I've set up, and it's cumulative. Depending on what classes I'm teaching, I'll try to mix the curriculums together so that they line up cohesively. Like currently, right now, both drawing one, figure drawing, and electronic imaging, we are talking about perspective drawing right now. We're all talking about the same thing at different scopes, but so I'll try to create alignment with stuff. And then while teaching is going on, there's like going to class, the lectures, the demos, bringing in the visiting artists, grading stuff. Like that feels almost autopilot. I've been teaching for almost 10 years now. There's a sense of autopilot, and I can focus on putting my attention on like the demos and then being with the students one-on-one during each class. So I get a chance to like check up on them. And then that creates a lot of in-between energy because I only teach usually like Monday through Thursdays. So on top of teaching, I think there's supposed to be content that comes into the classroom that I can share with them, because I think a good teacher has really cool show and tell moments. Like, I'm working on this, we're talking about perspective. I'm making an animation project right now and I'm using perspective. Here you go. But then if I'm making a project, then the project needs to do something, go somewhere. So then there's the question of, is the project going to be community engaging based? Is that the best place for it to fit? Or is the project going to be like potentially collaborative with other artists? Like that's basically party time for me, collaborating with other artists. That's fun time. Or is it going to be something that could potentially be a business venture? And the last couple of years, I started going down the business venture route. I started up the LLC, and that's because like artists are always trying to ask the question, how do I pay my bills with this stuff? So I think it's a good idea to learn the basics of like contracts and taxes and insurance, wearing all those hats, grants, to kind of bring that information back into the classroom. But then in that world, you start to get involved with community stuff. Like there's a couple of grants that are in the works right now, with the Mass Cultural Grant, the NB Beautiful or NB Creative Grant. And those are community engagement. Like I was just talking with Devin Burns yesterday. He put on that amazing festival downtown a few weeks ago. And then him and Eric Bailey's and Autumn with Starbath. So it's like Picnic Lunch, Starbath, and Eric Bailey's. They have something coming up December 3rd or 5th, I think.
Yeah, I believe the 3rd in Providence, if I remember correctly.
Is it in Providence?
No, it's actually, and I'm sorry, it's at No Problemo. I'm thinking of another.
Yeah, it's No Problemo. Yeah.
So it's downtown.
So like that's community engagement, because like I have nothing to do with that event, but I can use what skills I have to like promote it. And so then that comes into things like social media, algorithms, content creation, spreading. And that goes back to, like I did a show called Micro Macro last year, and it was about what we do on the small scale is showing up on the big scale and in between scale. So I'm not in any of those bands, but I'm a part of that same community. And there's concepts like high tide raises all ships, and also concepts of like, if you do a little bit, if everybody does a little bit, then things, get better more collectively. So that community engagement stuff starts to kick in with some of the business practices, right? But then the business practices kick in to help show students content of how to work in a professional setting outside of school. So it links. Did you ever I don't know if they still make this toy. Did you ever play with a Barrel of Monkeys or Lincoln Logs or the
Lincoln Logs? Yes.
Yes, or Legos.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that. Those approaches, like the content going on with Long Swan. I'm learning about how to create, content for social media merchandise, learning about songwriting, got stuff to animate too, which then connects over to teaching practices that comes back into community engagement. So it's interconnected. Now, not everything connects to everything. Like, for example, like that event that's coming up that Devin and Eric and Starbath are putting on, I'm not connected to that anyway outside of helping them promote the show, or like maybe connect Devin with information to grants that would help him put more of those shows on, because he is a beast when it comes to putting on events.
He sure is.
That's more like kind of hanging back and just being a bit more of like a Pepper Potts from Iron Man, like Ariel, like, okay, there's this information and this information, send it that way. And that's like teamwork also. So it's very rewarding. Dopamine is very helpful. Like every time I get involved with the right things, do what you love. there's like that rush of like, this feels right, this feels right. I try to follow that inner compass of this is what I have access to right now. I currently have access to a lot of time because I don't have kids, and I love my job teaching, and I love projects, and I love um, organizing. I love being a part of bigger projects, whether I'm at the head of them or if I'm one of the grunts at the bottom. I don't care. I also love how the future is made from what we do now. And I always feel like going back to that animation idea, the squirrels, the nuts, they're either by themselves or they're working as a team with the impending nuclear winter. The future is always, it's got a lot of potential, I feel like, based on what we do with it or what I do with my future, what my actions are. And I love time with other creatives. I love time with friends. I love time with other professionals. And I love the magic that comes from, there's this one thing I remember learning. I grew up in a very religious household, and there was one idea that always stuck with me. It was where two or more gathered, I'm there. And I always wondered what that meant. I thought that was pretty magical. And what I find is whenever two entities are throwing their magic together, whether it's creative, organizational, communication, there's really cool stuff that comes from that. So it's really fun just being a part of stuff and adding to stuff and then stepping back and seeing others, add their magic. So there's also a bit of like that sibling rivalry-ish dynamic. Like if you see one creative set doing this, you're like, oh, that's cool. I want to do this thing now. Now you have something to talk about,
Oh
right?
yeah,
So
it's that
that's
healthy
like,
competition because there's a
yes,
healthy element to it where you support other people's work, but it also spurs you to try and create something of your own or pursue something that maybe you hadn't considered.
yes, absolutely. Like another artist I've got to throw out there. I know David Guadalupe, he just had a really cool show at Co-Creative this week.
Yep.
And I think he's in that same mindset of like create, respond to other creatives, like and then take your response and make other cool stuff and then also make it about community. He's another like magic maker out there when it comes to connecting aspects of the creative process, the response, like the call and response to other creatives, and then seeing how that is a really epic energy that impacts community for the better. And I think I forget which school he teaches at, if he's still a teacher, but he's also someone that like invests these types of ideas into like the youth, like the future. So just that's kind of like an overall encompassing. It's like trying to like have fun experiencing life, um, also like dealing with life creatively, and then having that conversation with others, and then kind of checking in with other members of either the creative community or business community, and just taking it day by day. Like today we have this conversation going on, and it's helping keeping me in check with the projects that I've got going on, either with Long Swan or with the with teaching practice, the figure drawing group, or the roller skating group.
Oh
It's
yeah.
it's like it's momentum. It's like being present, consolidating, checking in, looking at where you are with something, and then moving forward, taking that, always thinking about it like in a day one mindset. Like, okay, today we have this is what's going on. And rather than tomorrow being like day two, tomorrow is also day one. It's like, okay, we
Right.
have, so it's that constant like response to whatever projects are going on and whoever's involved.
Yeah, the future will be here tomorrow. So we'll look at it and then it'll come. It'll be day one again.
Yes.
What's next for Long Swan? I know you're working on an EP. How is that going?
So we're still looking we don't know if we're going to have a drummer because we don't have one. And there's a couple of people who are going to kind of try some things out with us. And I'm reaching out to a couple of people. Then there's the fact that there's the guitar, the bass, the keys, and brass, and there's already a really neat texture that's coming from that group. So we're asking the question, do we move forward and continue to develop for the recordings with just these instruments, or do we just kind of maintain and wait for a drummer? We're kind of in that bit of, it's like in that, what is that word?
You're in a bit of a holding
Purgatory.
pattern.
It's like a bit of purgatory. Like, are we here? Are we
Yeah, the
there?
holding pattern.
A holding pattern. Yes, we're in a bit of that holding pattern, but also as we're in that, we're developing, and the songs are becoming more and more like crystallized, like the forms, the nuance. There's already visual ideas that are coming out for animations. So it's fascinating. Like we have some meetings with a couple of different drummers coming up, but we're not sure how that's going to go. And then in the meantime, we're visiting different venues. Like there's a place in Lincoln, Rhode Island we're going to tomorrow for a potential performance in December. And then there's a couple of venues in Providence that we're going to be checking out to perform with what we have now. And then we're just going to go out and keep, engaging like with different venues, with different artists, different musicians. And if a drummer's coming, cool. If not, we have a lot of like neat content that we're already working with. I'm ecstatic to get to that animation stage. The stories are developing. There's already ideas for how those stories are going to start to visually manifest, like how they're going to be rendered and the approach. So it's just, again, it's like just waiting and also like being active, performing, playing, and then just kind of like waiting for like whatever's going to come, whatever's going, like if it's beyond your control, what do? Right?
Right.
You do what you can with what you have, and you just keep moving forward with that.
And I think recognize that you do have a defined sound and dynamics. So you have a particular dynamic, you have a sound, you have arrangements for the song, that can work on its own. And it sounds like, finding the right drummer is more of like, is somebody going to click with this particular approach? Because
Yes.
it's not simply slotting a drummer in to play drums and
Right.
keep time and provide rhythm. It's somebody who fits in with the overarching approach and aesthetic of the band.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Kat, is there anything you want to share about Long Swan art? Anything? The floor is open.
All right. So the figure drawing at co-creative event, I'm going to take a tangent. That the last event for that is coming up the first week of December. We've got one of the figure drawing events tonight, and then it's going to take off again in the spring, probably late January. Figure drawing at co-creative, it happens twice a month. It's where anyone who's interested in working with the live model, where they're drawing, or they could be a sculptor if they want to bring clay, painting, and it happens at the Co-Creative Center, 137 Union Street. Let's see, what else do we have? There's the New England Skate Crew, which is a roller skating group that meets between Providence, Boston, Connecticut, different areas, and we go to different roller skating rinks, and it's like a jam skating group that's starting to grow. I think we're at 190 members now.
Wow.
And it started off with like just a half dozen of us, like who wanted to find other jam skaters to like learn and practice footwork with, either in the middle of the skate floor or doing really cool shuffle skating around the skate floor. So that group's starting to grow. You can find information about that group on Facebook. It's New England Skate Crew, 4 words. Let's see what else. There's some paintings that are in the works, but I'll talk more about those as that series is getting closer to being finished. As far as Long Swan goes, I'm excited about, recording the first EP, like at least probably 2 or 3 songs and starting to actually animate those. And I really like the idea of like the nuclear winter with the squirrels and the nuts. I think I'm going to develop that one more. And just, being around town, looking at different, listening to different artists, looking at different artist works, cool stuff going on, like from Gallery X, the Kilburn, the Hatch Street, downtown, also cool stuff going on in the region, from Fall River to Providence. And just, I want to give a shout out to like people who are on more the admin side that make things happen, because like you need the creatives, but you also need the organizers and their talent. And you need the business owners who take advantage of like being a part of that scene to help push their product or their services. So just that, again, like that collective effort of like the different things that each party does, I think is really wonderful. And I feel super, I'm very thankful and blessed to be in this area at this time where there's a lot of magic happening that's coming from a lot of different people.
Oh yeah, this is a phenomenal time for arts and culture and music here. Margot and I moved down here 4+ years ago, and she'd been working here for the year before. So, it's been an amazing journey to see that progression, because it was already a pretty lively scene back in 2018 when we got here. but it's just the amount of stuff that's going on is just unbelievable. And particularly for me as a musician, it's really exciting to know there are all these opportunities to play, do projects, record, work with people. It's just, a heck of a time to be here as a musician and songwriter.
Yeah, I love how this area has embraced like that idea of like if you want something done, do it yourself.
Yeah.
I love that about this
Because
area.
we don't have like a traditional music venue to work with. So, we're sliding into the Poor Farm, or, the shows that we've booked for AHA or Unexpected Music at places like Interwoven or over at Hatch Street at Diana Arvanites' studio. Like, we're creating spaces, and Devin obviously has done this exceptionally well with the 4752 Festival, linking up with business owners and saying, hey, can we get some music in here for this particular day? Because we've got, some music that's not going to find its way into a traditional venue. It's just remarkable how resourceful collectively we are as a community to just say, yeah, we don't have a rock club. Fine. We'll put a rock club in a business.
Yeah. Yeah, you got it. And it's interconnected. Like then you've got that connecting to aspects of the tourism a little bit.
Yep.
You've got that connected to aspects of like the New Bedford entrepreneurial, it's NBEC, I forget what the entrepreneurial council.
Yeah, New Bedford Economic Development Council.
Economic Development Council. It's definitely a team player mindset, and again, it's fantastic. More of that, please.
Absolutely.
So anything I can do to help like be a part of more of that more collectively.
Well, you already do a ton, Kat. Everything you do is amazing, from art to music. I'm excited for what's next, and I really appreciate you taking time to talk.
Thank you so much, Scott. I'm honored to be in here. Thank you so much. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us for another In Focus podcast, which is generously sponsored in part by Heavenly Spirits Importers and funded in part with grants from the New Bedford Cultural Council and the Fairhaven Cultural Council, local agencies supported by the Mass Cultural Council, a state agency. I'm Scott Bishop, and thanks for listening to the Artist's Index.